Um, Again, thanks for tuning in today. Super excited to be here with you all. I'm grateful for your time. My name's Marley. I founded two companies in 2022. One is called Purpose Sustainability Strategy. It's really turned into sort of a sustainable event education accreditation for event and hospitality teams. I'm currently advising the Democratic National Convention on their event sustainability at the moment, and also have technology Purpose Net Zero, which measures group-related travel emissions, which we will dive in a little bit further on today. I personally am really into the human side of what's happening within our world, within events, and how we all ladder up to sustainability and sort of our interactions together. So today's presentation is going to be a little bit different. For those of you that were in Las Vegas, it kind of hints at some of the things I talked about then, but it is a bit different. So a little bit about me. I have been in the industry 20 years, like Michelle said. I've been on all sides of the vendor supplier side of the equation, from venues to food to event design and decor to production. And really, I kind of think that what is happening now within our industry, within the push towards sustainable events, is highly psychological. I think it is absolutely, an ethical responsibility. I do think it drives business outcomes, but ultimately, I also think that we need to heal our inner landscapes in order to heal our outer environment. I have done a whole lot of meditation, a whole lot of introspective journeying, I guess you could say, over the last 5 years. And so I actually had a vision of my child, who is now 5, at 1 year old when the pandemic just began, coming to me as an 18-year-old, asking me angrily why I didn't do more to help the planet. So that was basically the beginning of, my journey as far as, I started changing every aspect of my life. And really, there was no turning back. There was no alternative way other than the best possible way that I could do it. And so within my employer at the time, I realized there really wasn't a large opportunity for me to make the sustainable impacts that I wanted to. And so I sort of realized like the only way forward was going to be a road that I was going to have to kind of create, or that's at least what it felt like at that time. Prior to meeting Michelle and all of you amazing Muse members. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. I am a person that practices gratitude every day. I write in my journal every day about how grateful I am. And ultimately, your commitment to this membership, to this organization, to what you do within your life and within your work matters. Scaling sustainability in the industry is essentially important for the industry, for risk resilience, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So 80% of the world's highly concerned about climate change, and I've even seen numbers from Edelman that have come out that have said 93% of the world is highly concerned. Yet I was in a course where this climate scientist Katherine Hayhoe showed these exact percentages, 80 and 8%. And 8% of the world is taking action. So that means, that's us, that's our cohort of people. We're in the minority, but it doesn't ladder up to how many people care and are concerned. So, from an empathetic lens, I see there's this disconnect, and how can we help to bridge this gap? And how can we also have empathy for those folks that are concerned, but they're not acting, maybe because they don't know how to. The other thing, 72% of Americans believe in climate, but only 45% believe that it will harm them or it'll affect them. So these are all just important stats that we must, to help ourselves as we have these important conversations with the various stakeholders associated with our events and our business. So I have seen in my, almost 2 years, almost 2 years since launch of my companies, I've talked to some of the, most sustainable companies in the world on paper, who have entire sustainability arms of consultancy, who they consult with other Fortune 50s, Fortune 100s on their sustainability. And then I've met with their global events team who doesn't have a sustainable event strategy, and they say, we're good. you know, I see a huge disconnect between the C-suite and these environmental claims, and even, corporate compliance and what's forthcoming, and this laddering down to events teams. I believe that that's because a C-suite doesn't know how to decarbonize the events industry, or their events, and they know they're very important to business outcomes. So we have compliance coming. The EU already has the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It affects 50,000 companies. We also have, California, the two pieces of legislation that will kick in 2026, requiring those same 20 or 50,000 companies to report. These are part of why I created Purpose Net Zero, is to ladder up to these regulations and ladder up to these corporations having to report these Scope 3 emissions per what I saw coming from the SEC at that time. The SEC is behind. They were supposed to come out in October of 2022 with their regulation, and it was said to possibly include Scope 3. Well, of the 4,200 publicly traded companies in the US, 4,000 people complained, 4,000 comments were made about Scope 3 largely. So they've walked that back. The other thing that I've heard from, executives at various companies is that, they say, but what about revenue? How is sustainability profitable? And, that I think is one of the biggest questions that we have to grapple with. And especially because sustainability has this sort of reputation of being expensive, or it's an added cost, or it's this. And, the way that I kind of look at it is, if you eliminate beef from your menu in favor of plant-based, that's a huge cost savings there, enough to maybe unlock composting. And further, if you limit, unnecessary purchasing and unnecessary consumption, swag and otherwise, and, I know there's also environmentally, swag is, it's a different, I don't want to get into that. But anyway, there's ways that it definitely is a cost savings. And also, Neil and Overdrive's a great example. The amount of money that they can save in energy can cover the cost of them even being there. So we need to sort of dispel these claims. So I wanted to tell a story about, I was in a room full of 40 different event planners focused on large conventions. I did a TED style talk for 10 minutes about sustainability within events. There was another person there who did a 10-minute TED talk on AI. There was a breakout. The 40 event planners were told to choose a side. The organizer was like, this table right here where these lovely two women are sitting, it's going to be the sustainability table. We broke. The only two people that came were the two women that were sitting at the table that was assigned to sustainability. My response was, what does AI matter if the world is uninhabitable? And again, that's a dramatic, and let me tell you, I have more hope than anyone in the world. But I guess what I'm trying to identify is that I think that sustainability for a lot of event professionals within our industry it's triggering, because it's an entire rethink of every perspective of how we do things. You sort of have to relearn everything that you're experienced in, and experience in our business is one of the biggest reasons why people stay in it. So how can we bring these planners along? How can we bring these professionals along? There's a huge opportunity here for us. Not only that, when we're talking about revenue and when we're talking about profitability, sustainability and sustainable industries are going to be the biggest capital shift in the history of humanity per Bloomberg. So it is the absolute future. So how can we, and it's funny because like me telling all you this is preaching to the choir. Like, I know that you absolutely already are practicing all these, and this is your beliefs, but I think that this psychological hurdle is a part of what we all are dealing with, at least I presume. So I'm really a huge proponent of, grieving and feeling, this climate grief that a lot of people are dealing with, and especially young people, moving through the stages of grief to acceptance, and through that. And really, that's where hope lives, and hope fuels happiness. I was listening to a podcast last night, and they were talking about like hopium, like hope as like a drug. Like, how do we get everybody to get to hope and get to this area of movement and action and being hungry to change and innovate? And so I talk about this a lot, but I learned about the concept in one of my recent courses about the concept of stationarity, and that basically stationarity posits that we only can create from what we know in history. So what humans have experienced thus far and backwards is what we know and how we basically can envision the future, and we can envision what's to come. But basically, we need to envision an entirely different scenario. We need to create a better future, one that's not, rooted in fossil fuels and industrialism. So how do we use storytelling and use what we do to create and envision this new opportunity and make sustainability within events exciting, make it the path, make it the thing that everybody should be seeking, doing, wanting. And we are a part of that story. And I want to tell you, you're doing great. So this is the way that I talk about event emissions. This is the way I talk about the business case. And, I kind of share this all the time in my education, but it's to me about future generations. Gen Z and millennials are, 60% of the American population, highly, highly invested in purpose-driven outcomes in sustainability. They are the future consumer. They are, the biggest capital allocation from generation to generation will be boomers to millennials, and that, and Gen Z, but that in itself, the boomer generation has the most money of any generation alive at this moment. So compliance and regulation is another aspect. Employee retention. There have been studies about employees quitting their jobs because their companies are not focused on sustainability enough or environmentalism, or they feel that they're greenwashing. The financial markets, in the 80s, there were 4 $1 billion climate disasters a year. In 2023, there were 28 in the US alone. So financially, there's risk all around the world, physically and to the market, both around businesses, literally, with climate disasters happening and otherwise. So finance is highly concerned about this as well. And then finally, brand reputation. People know if they're at your event and you're not composting, you're not recycling, there's not a waste diversion program. And then there's the things that they don't necessarily see, like the travel, but they're aware of their own footprint. Energy, is an unseen, unabatable, but impactful part of emissions. So how do we continue to have these conversations, educate folks, and, bring these things to the table? So Purpose Net Zero is a travel emissions calculator created to simplify sustainability for the 70 to 90% of event emissions from the attendee travel journey. I basically created this because as a consultant, I saw that this part of it seemed daunting, time consuming, and frankly, it was work I didn't want to have to do. I thought there was a much easier way to do this. How can we make this easier on event hosts so that they're not, I already know how much time event hosts have, which is like negative. So how can we make this easier, simpler, and less time consuming? So it's designed to measure group travel footprints for, event agencies, corporations, DMCs, the music industry, conventions, production, and more. I've had some really amazing conversations with various people, including Neil at Event Sustainability Live, about, the concept of measuring travel. And it has been really interesting. So I would really, really love this group's feedback about where you're at in terms of that conversation. Purpose Net Zero is not a calculator for all the things. It's not a calculator for everything else. I teach how to calculate energy and, hotels. We can use the Cornell hotel calculator. And obviously there's a lot of other calculators out there that do really great work. But Purpose Net Zero is created differently than those other calculators in one specific way. So this is an example of another calculator, and I don't think this calculator is part of Muse. And obviously there's no names or anything involved. I just wanted to show the difference of Purpose Net Zero. So this is a typical sort of event travel log for emission. So you have to gather, the number of attendees, number of miles, how many flights are short haul. Okay, first of all, does the average event host know what these mean? How many private jets, how many trains? So Purpose Net Zero is created to simplify this process so that you're not having to gather all this information, that the individual attendee can just give you the information is the intention. So Purpose Net Zero can either integrate with event registration or through a spreadsheet, which I'll show you momentarily. But the very few data points that we gather are a zip code, a city, or a full street address. And then we need 3 legs of the journey from your home to the venue. So most other calculators, they calculate from airport to airport. So they'll go Heathrow to O'Hare. Purpose Net Zero goes from my home to the endpoint location of the venue in whatever city. So it goes 2 legs further. And this Purpose Net Zero is never really, it's not intended to be I'm not a tech founder. You can tell I'm an events person that created a tool to try to solve my own problem. It's not going to be a tool that's going to try to do all the things for all of everyone. So we are currently integrated with Cvent and Swoogo. So basically through those platforms during the registration process, as I'm giving my information, my zip code or my city, then I can literally receive back in Swoogo what the carbon cost of my footprint is. So if I'm going to San Diego, and that's about $15 per metric ton at a $15 per metric ton price point, or 1 metric ton of emissions, during the process, it would say, hey, Marley, your emissions for this event are $14.47. Do you want to add this fee to your total registration price? And then I can actually choose to pay for my own footprint in that case, if you're going through Swoogo. We're talking to other tech companies about other integrations. If there is no integration, that doesn't stop us from being able to calculate. So basically, this is a picture of the spreadsheet that we use. So basically all we need is one of the green points, or like either the full address, the city, or the zip code. And then we need the legs of the journey. And the first leg is the only one required, because obviously if everybody's local and they're all taking a train or a car there, that's all that we need to know. So I think to speak a little bit about the first part of the presentation, I feel like even though maybe people don't want to know what the measurements are to their group's travel, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And that to me is sort of like a mirror to our industry problem at this moment around, just because we're not wanting to acknowledge sustainability. And I don't mean we, like you all, I just mean, the folks that are resistant. It doesn't mean that it's not there. It doesn't mean that it's not something that we should be accountable for. And I believe that our industry's risk resilience depends on our ability to innovate and be proactive around sustainable outcomes. So, Purpose Net Zero is really created to inform sustainable futures. So I'll show you momentarily in an example, but basically once we have the data for one group of people, we can plot that data to any location in the world, and we can tell you which is the most emissions friendly, place to host your event. I also think, I really think human connection is essential to humans. Like travel is, is already being scrutinized in some ways. And so I had during that same conversation where, the group all went to AI, I had a guy ask me, but what about sustainable aviation fuel? And it's like, if that doesn't grow at the same rate, that we decarbonize every other aspect of industry, it's still not a guarantee that people are going to be able to just fly everywhere they want to, in 2050. We really don't have that guarantee. It's going to come down to survival, so anyway, enough about this. I did want to share this. I love this systems change model, because I want you to, I'm a cheerleader also for us as individuals to feel like we're doing something, to feel like we're making a difference. It does matter. You know, the political and cultural shifts are far past the internal. Basically, it all starts within, is really what I believe. And the more that we can sort of affect our own local networks, our relational, you know, encounters, our groups, and also be having these conversations with all people that we meet, you know, the more that it dynamically expands to these other macro level changes. And I think for a long time, at least in America, I know I was guilty of assuming that the government, you know, had our best interests, and that was really almost like who we laddered up to in terms of change. And now, you know, being in this position, it feels like, oh wait, no, we're all here, we're all a part of it, we all matter in this change that we need to see in the world. So this is where you can find me. Eventsofpurpose.com is my consultancy, Purpose Net Zero. And then I have a podcast called The Blueprint Within that's very focused on like inner healing and inner work. And a circular future is another wild concept that I'm working on around collective capital for the highest good. Nothing really to report there quite yet. But now I'm going to jump into Purpose Net Zero and the actual. Okay, cool. So thank you so much for those of you who participated in the survey. So this is a pretend muse meeting, and just to showcase kind of the way that it works. And so we had 15 people register. I did a $15 per metric ton price point. And so actually I'm going to back up just one more step. So when Purpose Net Zero, it's super simple the way it's created, and it's intentionally created that way. So this is what I do on the back end, so you have a little bit of a sense of how it works. It's even they created this part for me to be as simple as possible. We had your logo, your subdomain, your tenant name is the client name, and then down here is where we put the cost of CO2 per metric ton. So I typically recommend anyone start at $15 just because that's where carbon offsets kind of begin. Carbon offsets and that scrutiny is a whole nother ballgame. I don't mark up carbon. I don't facilitate the funding of anything. I just sort of help people figure out what they want to do and how they want to do it. I'm a huge fan of insets versus offsets. So that's a whole nother conversation. If we're integrated with Cvent for the process, if they have like a 5% transaction fee, we just match that here. So for the Muse event, we have less than 10 metric tons of carbon for 15 people, which obviously is super low. But the part that I love to kind of showcase is this. And sorry, my computer is a little slow right now. Okay, so we have everyone's name, we have their email address, and then when we scroll over here, sorry, my computer is very slow. So we can see everybody's zip code and then the modes of transport for them to get to Chicago to our pretend meeting, and then the total emissions. So we had a few that were international who were, oh, and sorry, then the cost as well. So you can see, some are very low. Pretty much once you get into the 1.5 metric tons, this is an international. I think this is Eduardo. I put in a couple of funny ones. I put in Chris Corsini, my favorite astrologer who lives in Lisbon. I think this is his. Mine was 0 metric tons because mine's a train and I live like 2 stops away. So it's like less than 0.1 metric tons of carbon for me to get there. But this is basically how it works. So when you want to, for example, there's another aspect called a custom tag. So in this area, we could have said Muse member, founding member, exhibitor, VIP client, staff member. You can label it anything, but what you can do in the end is pull these various aspects. So you can pull, if we had asked for anybody's city, we could pull city and full name and then export that information to Excel. And then you can see trends in the data. So next, I'm going to jump over to this case study. So this was a group of 200 and a few people that actually, this is a true event that went to Dubai, 204 people. They did a $10 per metric ton price point, which is pretty low. But 412 metric tons of carbon for 200 people is very high. It's over 2 metric tons per person. About 60% of the guests for this event were from North America, and about 40% were from Asia Pacific. So that alone, basically you could infer that Dubai is probably not the most emissions friendly location to host. So I took that exact same group of people and plotted them to host the event in New York. So the exact same information. This was registration through SWOGO. And you can see that the emissions impact was less than 50%. So having that event in New York versus Dubai would have saved the group 203 emissions or metric tons of carbon. So also, I think another good thing, so even if this was at a $15 per metric ton price point, we're talking about, over a little over $3,000 to offset these emissions for travel. So that's the other thing. I think a lot of people are really nervous that it's going to be a super high dollar amount. And, depending on what you set for your metric tons, it is usually surprising to people how low it is. Here's another client. And this client, I'm not going to go into all these, but basically they used Purpose Net Zero with the same 2,000 attendees to see which of all these locations was going to be the lowest emissions location for the group. So Denver wound up being the best option. And basically they were going to use this to measure, to essentially use this as a comparison tool for one of their clients. So that is Purpose Net Zero. The other thing I just want to show is so when we do enter an event, basically the event name, convention center, we use all the address identifiers for anything in America, and then longitude for anything outside of America, or the US. And then this is where you can allow individual attendees to cover the cost of their carbon. So with